Hello, everyone. Welcome to Design Together, a podcast exploring how designers work together. I am your host, Abby Ryan Guido, a designer and educator working in Philadelphia, collaborating everywhere. We have a first today for the show. I have two guests today who work together daily at GD Loft, a design firm based in Philadelphia. Allan Espiritu. Allan, is that correct? Can you say it the right way?
Espiritu.
Oh, great.
Yep.
All right. Is the founder and creative director of GD Loft, as well as a professor at Rutgers. Kernan is the principal managing director of GD Loft, where he's been for over 16 years. Together, they have worked on projects for the city of Philadelphia, the AIGA in Philly, and a handful of local universities, just to name a few. I'm really excited to dig into how they work together with each other, with clients, with stakeholders. Allan, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Abby.
Thanks for having us, Abby.
Allan, let's start with you. If you could share a little bit about your background, how you came to start GD Loft, and kind of what you've been up to.
Sure. I started as a designer in New York, actually. Right. I went to school at Rutgers, so it's nice to be teaching there.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, exactly. After that, I worked in New York, actually, luckily enough. But actually, before that, I worked at Money Mailer, making coupons, which had a total big influence on my actual perspective on design when I look back at it. But then worked in Manhattan for a long time, for almost 10 years, primarily at New York University, where I was in-house there. Then moved back to Philadelphia, where I got married, and then worked at some small studios in Old City, as well as advertising. Some of the places don't exist anymore. But then after that, I went to grad school later. I attended Yale School of Art for graphic design and then fell into teaching. It wasn't really part of the plan. And moving back to Philadelphia wasn't totally part of the plan as well. But these opportunities came up to teach and to start a studio. I've always wanted to start a studio. And the studio really started more as a venture, as a think tank kind of experimental laboratory.
Interesting.
And it was just a place that I wanted to be able to see if I can test these methodologies that I had been experimenting with in grad school to the commercial world. And if those two worlds can kind of meld together was what I was really interested in starting the studio. But it's taken not a whole different turn, but it's expanded. And the notions of the studio has really expanded. And the mission of the studio has also really expanded. And maybe Kevin can take it from there.
Sure. I started actually as Allan's student at Rutgers, Camden, and we kept in touch over the years. And I was freelancing for GD Loft and consulting. And so I would work on various projects with Allan and bring in work. But during that time, I started off at a medical company called Current Science, Current Medical here in Philly, and then went over to Philadelphia City Paper and was their senior designer. Then went to a marketing firm called Turnaround Marketing and ended up at Drexel and got my graduate degree and thought, I need to figure out the business end of this. We're also working with a lot of nonprofits. So
what degree did you go to Drexel for?
I got my arts administration degree. So it was great, very appropriate for what we were doing. And I really focused on the entrepreneurship and the inner workings of the organizations, how we could help improve them from the inside out.
That's awesome. So Allan, what was the big change when Kevin came on? Like, how did that change just even your day to day? I imagine it's a lot different going from you to having more voices.
Well, the change was a natural one, and it was something that I think had to happen. It was interesting because I really never thought the studio as a full-time gig. I mean, as you are as well a professor, I mean, it's very difficult to juggle the two worlds, but it is required, as university professors, that we continue our practice and continue research. So I looked at that space to be kind of that, where, again, can I use these methodologies that I was experimenting with that were really based on some theories that I was really interested in, and can I apply them to clients?
So your clients are kind of like your guinea pigs in your lab.
Exactly. And when that's the case, modalities of business don't really kind of are formalized in some ways. It's like, yeah, well, let's talk about money after, but I want to hear about the project. Let's see how we can develop this. But the project started to take off. I started to get more clients on just naturally through word of mouth. And, I was working with some part-time designers, and mostly my graduating seniors I would bring in. But to the point that I needed to start to really think about, things were taking off, that I really needed to start to think about the business end of it and how do I expand, but keeping the mission, that was really, really important to me. And speaking of collaborations, when you're working by yourself for so long, I was scared of that adjustment to work, right? To work with someone, and it had to be the right person. And Kevin was ideal is Kevin has great design chops, but at the same time, Kevin really has a built-in business acumen that I really never had. And it was something that I always saw in him, even as a student. I'm like, you should really follow that, because you naturally have that gift, and you have natural talents for negotiation and finances and money and understanding that. And that's a whole different, I think, skill set that I had minimally of, but I don't even know if I was willing to develop as much. So bringing in a partner really had to happen at some point if I was going to, if we were going to continue this endeavor.
And I think that what you just said is so important for other people to hear, that as a leader, it's okay to say, that is not my area of expertise, and I don't really have much interest in becoming an expert. And so I am going to find the people that are, and I'm going to work with them. And I think that, that's really great to hear. Kevin, I wonder if you could walk us through a little bit about how the studio works today.
Sure. The studio today functions with Allan as creative director, myself as managing director, and Matt Higgins is our graphic designer. And then, as projects go on, if we need to bring in more people, we can expand from a 3-person studio up to 20 people if we need. We have trusted vendors and freelancers that we work with over the years that, we just rely on. So, it really depends on the project, but what that affords us to do is we don't have to charge the clients all this extra overhead. So they're getting an affordable price and getting what they need for the project. So that's really how it's working today. And with everything going on with the pandemic, we're just staying in touch through Slack, through email, video calls every day, just so that we're on the point with the projects.
Absolutely. So when a project comes into your studio, how does it start? Someone approaches you, let's say it's a new client, so it's someone you don't have a relationship with. Where does it go? How do you kind of work through the process with them to get things going?
So if someone were to come in today and we didn't have a relationship with them before, we usually do a series of kickoff meetings with them, just get more information. We always try to mine as much information as we can from the client and talk about what they're looking for, how we can help them, make suggestions throughout the process, because some people come to us and be like, I need a brochure. And we'll be like, oh, what you really need is this. And so we're trying to steer them in the right direction.
The classic I love, it's like, I need a website, but you don't have a logo.
Yeah, exactly.
So with that kind of kicking things off and brainstorming, how do you bring clients into that part of it when you're starting to kind of ideate? Are they involved at all?
They are part of the process right from the beginning. And the first thing we actually do with our own process and collaboration is actually question their intentions, because clients, I think, come with a preconceived notion of what they need. But when they present the question or they present their intention of what they're really trying to do, you realize that's not what you need. Just because the person or the organization that is akin to yours has a poster for that event doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you need for your particular project. And I like to kind of pull questions out of them, or at least pull their intentions out or motivations for, or what they think they need, and then start to kind of question that. And then we kind of all start at the same level at that point. Then the project actually is kind of equal grounding in terms of conceptualization.
Is there resistance to that ever? The client says, no, I know what I want. And how do you respond to that besides walk away?
That's interesting. That's so funny that you asked that question, because
wow.
Yeah, I don't think we've gotten much resistance. What's more interesting is they respond with that's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. I mean, and that's where we try to just reinforce why you hire a designer, or reinforce what skill sets we can bring as a studio or as collaborators in the project. But for the most part, I mean, if they have some particular thing that they want, like a book usually is what they'll always say. And usually we don't resist that, because anytime we can design a book, we're all up for it. But for the
everyone needs a book.
Exactly. But for the most part, we don't get much resistance. I think it's more that they see the reason they're hiring an expert.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Yeah, no, I recently had that with a client who, it's like, you're twice as much as, the person I hired who's straight out of school. And I said, it's okay, let's just try it. So I lowered a little bit in the conversation yesterday. She said, you were right. It's a very different process if you're working with someone who knows what they're doing. I'm like, okay.
Exactly.
But that you learn with time, right? When you're, early on, you tend to say yes and okay a lot more than.
The difference between you and a student, they're paying for your experience and, everything you've learned along the way. That student is still a little green, and yes, could probably do the job. It's going to be slower and not as well crafted as you
can. And Abby, may I add, I mean, this is the skill that Kevin brings to the studio. I think as creatives, we're like, hey, I just want to do it. I just want to, but I think if you find that collaborator or that right partner, or someone, as designers, that person can really accentuate what we do on the kind of from a different perspective other than the creative,
Sure. So with that, I'm sure there's some struggles as well. Are there any times where the two of you don't necessarily see eye to eye?
Yes.
Well, yeah. Well,
Who wants
it's natural.
To jump in on that one first?
I'll jump in and just lead the way here. I think where that comes in is just, Allan, as the creative director, is very excited about the project, is very enthusiastic. And so am I, as a whole studio we are. But, sometimes we have to pump the brakes and say, okay, what's the budget here? What are they trying to achieve? Who's their audience? And really get a handle on the project before we go, running down the path, and make sure that we're making the right decisions from the beginning. So I think when Allan's like, let's do this, I'll be like, but their budget's only X. We have to think about how his idea can come closer to mine. And I say a lot of times, Allan's like this really big picture thinker, and I try to bring it more into a realistic realm and birth the idea into existence, because he has these big ideas that we have to tackle a lot of times.
It seems like what works so well for you both is that you both have your own way of thinking and respect each other and what you bring to the table. Did that naturally happen at the beginning, or has this evolved over the years?
I think in everything I do, I really believe in people that have contrasting views from me. I'm not really interested. I've never been really interested in people that have similar views to me because I guess I'm way more interested in learning from other people. And, in a small studio environment, in this particular case, you can't have people that do the same thing. We're just too small. We need diverse thinking in everything that we do. And I just kind of really value that even in the way that I live. I just kind of try to take that into my practice as well, because I really do believe that you'll come up with a solution that's far more inclusive if you just have multiple views on the same thing.
Right, which I totally agree. I mean, that's part of why I'm doing this now, and is to talk more about collaboration. And I think that's a really important key, is having diverse people who work together so they have those different perspectives and different approaches. So you have another full-time designer. What is like the creative process like when you all start a new project? Are you, Allan, are you taking the lead and sketching things out and saying, this is what I see, or is everyone doing their own and bringing it together?
Yeah, I mean, the process is really, again, because we're a small studio, I think that process is a bit more very organic in that way. I do, but as creative director, I definitely I usually will have a vision, not always. I mean, Matt and Kevin play such an important part in that, idea generation, that initiating of concepts. I'm never, one to throw those ideas away. But sometimes when there is certain projects, I do have a certain vision and I know this is the right solution for it. But there's many times where, I don't, and I love to hear what everyone's thinking about it. But then at that point, we just kind of all, when a project comes in, we just kind of powwow and think about the concept, the idea right away, what we're trying to achieve, how can we interact with that audience correctly, in what mediums, in what language, and what format. Like, those are the things that we kind of think about, and we kind of make sure that we're all on board or see the same vision. And then the actual designing process is really kind of like a very symbiotic kind of, again, back and forth relationship between these guys. I sometimes will go, I'm tired of this. Like, can you take it over, Matt? Can you look at this and see what I'm doing wrong with this thing? Because I'm getting nowhere. Or he'll do the same with me. Or then we'll throw Kevin into the mix and say, Kevin, how will we make this? Or is this even good?
And that's one of the perks of not working by yourself, because, for myself, I'm similar to you, that I grow as I need to and bring people on, but sometimes I'm just working, and, I luckily have a lot of friends in design, so I can shoot it to them, but it's, different than actually handing a file to someone and saying, you do this for a little bit.
Yes.
Something you mentioned, Allan, made me think of something, Kevin. I don't know which of you said this. It was in an exchange we had. You said what really sets you apart from other studios is the collaborations you have with your intended audience for your work. And I wanted to talk about that a little more, because that was really interesting.
Yeah, I'll speak of this, and then Kevin can add his perspective on this, if you don't mind, Kev. But from the creative standpoint, one of the things that I think about is, I'm not ever an expert on the kind of visual articulation, or I believe that the visual articulation is very, very much a democratic process, in the way that I want the audience to be engaged in the process of design, because they become, if they're engaged in the process, they become invested in the piece as much as us being part of the creators. I believe the audience is a co-creator. So with those ideas in mind, we really believe in making work that's kind of open-ended, and that the audience partakes in the finishing of the work. It could be conceptually, it could be physically, but they have a part in finishing the actual design.
I think too, by focusing on the audience a lot more than, of course we respect what the client wants, but we're thinking about their audience a lot of times and how they can help work with us.
How do you engage that audience? Like, literally, how do you find them? How do you know who they are? And how do you bring them, into the project?
I mean, I can give you examples of certain projects that we've worked on. I mean, with one of a recent logo project for an organization called Impact. Their mission is to help the Kensington community on various levels. And the organization is really made up of the volunteers and the workers. That makes that specific organization. They're a nonprofit, community-based. Well, we just decided to make sure that the community is the logo, literally, where they all drew the letter I in the word impact. And then that actually cycled as part of the logo itself, where the I actually...
So they literally made some of the logo.
Case, yes, in that case, they literally
I love that.
Became part of that. And in some cases, we'll have where we've made a project where they have to choose conceptually what they want of the project. So, we like to inject a little bit of humor sometimes. And with the AIGA stuff and stuff that I've made for AIGA, I like to inject that stuff and also to critique design. Like I've made posters where, look, you either want information or you want visuals. And sometimes it's to challenge the audience and what they feel is important to them. And so we've made projects where you can love something visually, but you might not get any information from it, or you can get something that's totally informative that's just not exciting, but will really direct you to do what you do. And then challenging the audience to go, well, could there be a balance, or does it have to be a choice, or what is that? So that's an example where we engage the audience on a conceptual level and sometimes have them be critics of what we do. And again, we've done projects where I've created books where you choose as an audience member how to access the book in itself. Where do you want to access the information? It doesn't have to happen at the beginning of the book because that's what the conventions say. Maybe you just start in the middle. And then as designers, we're thinking about, well, how do you create a structure that's fluid and not so linear? But in this case, in this artist catalog, we wanted to make sure that the audience can access this little brochure because of its format anywhere they wanted to just start. So these are just simple examples, or some examples of some of the work that we've done where we've interacted with the audience, or even democratized the design process where they become invested in it as much as we are.
Yeah, no, that's really great. Makes me think of so many things. And what you were saying brought back what you talked about at the beginning about how the studio started as this experiment in this lab. And so, Kevin, from your perspective, some of these approaches are, I would say, non-traditional, right?
They are, yeah.
You are being collaborative. And I'm wondering, how do you work with the clients to help them understand that this is part of your creative process and that they should be on board and not question some of the, crazy ideas you're throwing their way?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to, they trust us as experts. They've hired us to do this job. And so part of our job is walking them through it, not just springing this on them. So from the beginning, we're prepping them for this and talking about how we're going to roll out these projects and how we can get their audience. A lot of them want their audience engaged more. They don't want a throwaway piece that is going to show up in the mail and they look at it for 2 seconds and it's in the recycle bin. They want something that the audience is going to stay with and engage with. And that's where we come in. And I think we really create pieces that get people interacting with them, and they find new meaning in it when they revisit it and come back to it. And like Allan was saying, even that logo, even though they might not have a printed piece of it, the audience, they know the community's part of it. They have more investment in impact services now. And, maybe they'll volunteer more. Maybe they'll participate in their programming more. So there's all these auxiliary benefits that happen because now the audience is part of it and they're invested. They have a little skin in the game. They're not just, viewers. We're not treating them like a traditional audience. We're treating them like they are part of the process.
And has this evolved over the years? Because what I think is interesting, I can remember early in my career conversations about audiences, but not user personas, not really digging in. And there was still this divide between, and I think I've talked about this before in the show, like designers know best. And you come to me because I'm the expert. Now leave me alone and let me finish my project. But it's really exciting. I think that the world has changed and so has design. I don't know if you all have had the same experience as me.
Yeah, I think that Kevin always says, "Oh, you always need a little bit of confidence. You need some confidence about like the things you know." But I think that lack of confidence, I've never thought myself as
an expert?
I don't know, as a designer. Like an expert designer, or, I've always maybe thought, I started as a want-to-be artist, honestly. And, it was kind of diverted because my parents were like, you need to make money. And so I found graphic design. So yeah, I always felt this, I think everyone feels that imposter syndrome and that kind of like inability to kind of articulate your like, okay, I'm okay at it or whatever. And I think sometimes that I've analyzed this, and sometimes that kind of sharing of the process is something for me that feels just more natural in the way that I view myself.
So you might have been ahead of the curve.
I don't know if I was ahead of the curve, but I do think, it was always part of it as almost like a security blanket, if you will, like it became like, well, look, we made this together. It's not just me. But it also comes from the idea that, like, the one problem I did have when I shifted to graphic design was like, why was my work not as valued as a painter's work or a sculptor's work? And that also plays into that. And there's one of the methodologies that I really started to experiment with in grad school was, well, how do I create this idea of aura in works that, inherently don't have aura? Like we talk about aura with painting and the fine arts, but who's to say that because I'm a graphic designer and the medium that I work with is primarily ephemeral, that these works don't have that aura? And that's where my conversation and my process really started. And that's where I think I started to think about the audience and their engagement. And if they're engaged, well, then they value the work. And then that aura kind of develops. So that's theoretically I was really interested in. And that's where this idea of audience really comes into play.
Awesome. Kevin, did you have any thoughts on all of that?
Allan said it very nicely. I just wanted to add, when I say we're an expert, I think we're an expert in design. I think the clients, know their business or organization. They're experts in their field, and we respect that. And so when we collaborate with them, we treat them as equal partners because they know what they're talking about, and we're just trying to help enhance, either their mission or, a program or whatever they're trying to achieve through the lens of graphic design or through strategy.
Yeah, and I guess in a way, I don't want to call the audience an expert, but maybe we can. They know what they need. You're looking to, buy a book from an exhibition, like why you're getting that, what you want to feel from it. And so in a way, they have that set of their own experiences to bring to the project as well.
And maybe that's the better way to, I think, to express it, Abby. Maybe it's experiences that we bring, right? I mean, we can't, I don't like to say I'm an expert, and I don't think they can say they're an expert, but we have experiences that we felt or know about within our different areas. And that kind of melding, again, I know that collaborating that's what makes it, really kind of successful. If we could just kind of break that down and then say, hey, let's start from the beginning. And you know what you know, I know what I know. Let's make something,
So this, Allan, is for you, since you have a connection to teaching and students. What would you tell students if they're coming to small studios? What should they be thinking about as they're entering a small studio with thoughts about working with others and collaboration and just being new in the field?
You have to know a lot of things. I think when you work with a small studio, you have to have a lot of skills. You have to know how to write. You know how to communicate. You have to know a lot of things beyond design. I think and that's what I evaluate in a student that wants to come and work with us or intern with us. What are your outside interests? What can you write an email? Can you write a proper sentence, or can you explain your idea in like written form? It's really important to me. How, what's your attitude to learning something new? Because there's only three of us here, and one of us has got to learn something. If this comes up, a new skill set, it needs to happen quickly. So my advice is, you have to be open, but you also have to realize it's just not about design traditional skills anymore. Like in a small studio, we might ask you to do a lot of other things other than design, because we need you to do that. And we do that as well, because we can't afford to, we don't have multiple people taking on very specific and specific jobs.
Kevin, how do you look for those skills? I mean, the writing is obvious, right? I mean, you can see how they reached out to you, and you can go on their site, and you can look a little bit online and find some of their writing. But how else do you evaluate them to see if they would be a good fit?
Sure. We can see in their portfolio a variety of work. I think, again, like you said, how they address themselves in their resume, their cover letter. We bring them in to interview with us and, just see if they fit personality wise. That's so important in a small studio. There's three of us. If we bring in a fourth person, an intern, and, they have a huge ego or they're not jiving with us, then that's a problem. I mean, you don't want to disrupt the flow of work and creativity. So they just have to fit in personality wise. So that plays in a lot of things. Do they love food? I mean, we love food. We share food.
That's right.
So
everyone listening, you got to make sure you know that.
Yeah. So
bring some goodies to your interview. Now you're going to have an intern come in with like a full meal for you all.
Yeah.
I brought that up because it made me think about a student who just knows that they're just not great in interviews. And I've been trying to work with them, and that they haven't gotten many positions, but in the classroom, they are like the life of the classroom and participating in all the critiques. And I'm like, I don't know, like take an improv class. You got to do something because you're amazing and you got to get past that first step. But, I agree. Like, you're in a small place. Pre-COVID, I would have designers come and work with me at the studio. And, I've had some that don't talk at all, and that drives me crazy. And then some that talk all day, and that also drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And those things are really important, that you are fitting in with the culture of that studio.
I think, my advice to that person, and I think I was partly like that when I first started, like they just have to interview a lot. That's all it is. I mean, it's not even like, even if it's not interviewing for a job, I would say, hey, try to just get some face time. Like, even if you're not there for the position, maybe you ask for an informational interview, just so it's for you and not them,
I know. I was like, throw it out there, like walk into the interview and say, before we get started, I just want to say, like, I have not been great in interviews. Like it, and I sometimes I feel like putting the truth out there kind of puts everyone at ease, that like, if you mess up, then everyone knows you already said like, I'm still getting better at this. And I feel like that humanizes us a little bit.
Kevin will know I'm a believer in like putting it all out there sometimes in the beginning of, if I'm nervous, you will know, like, I remember
loves to do that.
And it's not even intentional. It's just like, oh my God, I just gotta get it out, or else I'm gonna explode.
I love those moments. I mean, I'm sure, I think being in a classroom, you learn that quickly, like how important it is to help your students know that you are them at some point, and that you really aren't that different, even though you've had years of experience. And humanizing things, I think, helps a lot with those connections. And I think it makes for better collaboration in general, because everyone just feels safe to know that we've all been there, right?
Yeah. And maybe that's what stands you out from the other person that's like, a little bit more robotic at an interview. And I think people can read through people and can really sense honesty. And I think that's all you really have to do. If you're nervous, you're nervous. And and I think a good interview will find a way to calm you down, or just say, hey, it's okay. Don't worry. It's a safe space kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I think, too, another advice for students, if it's a hot summer day, you're sweating bullets on the way there, stop in the restroom, make sure your hair is looking good. Make sure
This sounds like a personal story, Kevin.
Well, when I was a senior designer over at Drexel, working for their admissions department, we had interviewed a whole bunch of people for a junior designer position, and people were coming in left and right. And this one guy just came in, he looked like a hot mess. It looked like he ran the 50-yard dash to get to our office in the middle of the summer. So just saying, still appearances, even on Zoom, make a difference. I always tell my students when I teach over at Rutgers, don't come in pajamas, sit up straight. We don't need to see you lounging. And, that goes a long way.
So speaking about Zoom, I'm curious if, Zoom and collaborating remotely has impacted the studio. And are you all really, really looking forward to getting back, or have you gotten used to having your shoes off while you work?
We've definitely got acclimated to Zoom and working from home quickly. If you had asked us, 6 months prior to that what Zoom is, we probably would have been like, I don't know what Zoom is. But, as soon as March hit, we knew, and we got adapted to it quickly and started working on Slack channels. We, we're doing group texts, phone, Zoom all the time, and we do our daily check-ins. So I don't think the creativity is going away. I cringe when I see these articles.
I miss the food.
I miss the food. I miss the camaraderie. But being able to just turn next to me, we have an open floor plan, and say, hey, Allan, what do you think of this project? What do you think of that? We miss that, and we want to get back. I mean, we definitely do. And I always am surprised when I see all these articles like, we're never going back to the office. I'm like, I'm going back. I don't know about you, but I'm getting back to the studio as soon as we're allowed to.
I mean, I think those little nuances in everyday kind of conversation and that kind of organic conversations that just kind of come out, like either a project or even personal or whatever. I mean, those things are really integral for me, at least in the creative process. I mean, it gives me, that time of pause that I need, but it's also kind of informative in that time. But that kind of, I miss it greatly. I mean, I think, from the creative standpoint, from the not that it's hindered us from creating work, but I'm missing those little nuances that can make the design even a little better just through a little bit of conversation that I could just turn around or go to the right in front of me and ask a question. Now.
I know. I still haven't figured out how to sketch on something. I'm constantly the person who's like, check this out. I want to be able to take your paper and just draw on it and hand it back to you.
Exactly.
How about working with clients remotely and collaborating with them and audiences? I'm sure that has its own challenges. You have a lot of clients in Philadelphia, so I imagine you did have a lot of FaceTime with them.
Yeah, and I think, the collaboration hasn't changed. Actually, it's saved us time in that way. We're not crossing town in a Uber or Lyft to go to a meeting for an hour. And we're cool with that. I don't think anything's been lost in the meetings. We've expanded up into Boston. We haven't missed a beat with the clients. They love what we're doing, and it's really, we're hitting the mark with them. So I think if anything, this has given us an opportunity to expand out further than our reach of Philadelphia and the tri-state area.
I think the one thing that Zoom allows for, especially with clients, is to be very concise. Because no one wants to be on a Zoom meeting for 3 hours. So you have, sometimes when you meet face to face, it's more just a little bit free flowing. But I think with the advent of Zoom and meeting on Zoom, things are very concise. We have a goal. Let's get this done so we can log off, kind of thing.
Kevin, to your point of clients everywhere, like I myself lived in New York and in LA for a while. And so a lot of my clients are still out west and all over. And so I worked remotely with them forever. I have a client that I've had for 12 years that I've always worked remotely with, but it has changed. We never met on Zoom before because it just wasn't the norm. And so I think that's such a great benefit of this, is that hopefully you all can, your work is so beautiful and amazing that hopefully it does open the doors and clients outside of Philadelphia are more confident working remotely with someone.
Oh, thanks. No, I appreciate that.
You're right, Abby. You bring up an interesting point. I do think clients are far more comfortable working with people, remotely. Like, oh, you don't have to be a design studio right in Philly, especially for nonprofits, I think. Larger corporations are used to that kind of interaction, right? That indirect kind of on-screen interaction. But the clients that we work with are smaller art institutions, nonprofits, community organizations are not usually used to this kind of remote interaction. But you know what? We work with a couple of clients up in Boston, and they're nonprofits, community organizations, and they're comfortable now, and they're even like, oh, it's such a great perspective to have outside the city, and I think that's something that's opened my eyes as well.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you both for being here today. For everyone listening, if you'd like to see some of the amazing work by GD Loft, please visit their website. It's www.gdloft.com. Allan, Kevin, thank you both so much. This was wonderful. I'm so excited to keep these conversations going with you both. I can't believe we haven't connected before today.
Exactly. It's crazy, Abby. I'm so happy to.
But you're not getting rid of me now.
Hey,
so.
Let's keep it rolling.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you all so much for listening. If you are enjoying our show, please post us a review on whatever podcast streaming platform you use. To learn more about us, check out our website at designtogetherpod.com.